Okay, hello everyone. On November 22nd, 2019, George Webb reporting live from District Court in Greenbelt, Maryland. The verdict has just been read here in the case against Mark Lambert, violating the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, as well as money laundering charges, as well as conspiracy charges. There was about 11 charges. The jury found a few not guilties out of the 11 charges, I think about 3 or 4. It's either between 7 charges or 8 charges they found him guilty. It was a unanimous verdict. Boy, this has been a long saga for me. Up until this point in time, I think I'd been the only American ever to serve time in the case, and that was because I was reporting on it. But it now looks like sentencing, of course, won't be today. It'll be in the future. You can only hope for a suspended sentence, but in cases like these, usually there's time involved with Mark Lambert. And I'll tell you, I came down here convinced, or pretty close to being convinced, Mark Lambert was guilty with all the research I had done. And then I followed the case every day. Was here most of the trial days, and did even more research and talk with the lawyers and more gathering with the other court reporters. And I was just absolutely swung over as innocent by the defense team. The defense team really did a fantastic job. Sullivan did a fantastic job. You could tell the jury had all these questions in their mind that Sullivan had planted, seeds of doubt, and they were valid seeds of doubt. Sullivan planted the question of why, if Mark Condrey, or why if Darren Condrey was the other CEO partner of Mark Lambert. He had said he was guilty, and he had said his wife had also been arrested. And why didn't they call that witness? If the prosecution's case was so strong, why didn't they call Carol Condrey here today? There was obviously several transactions which were only exclusively run by Carol Condrey and Darren Condrey. Mark Lambert wasn't involved in the transactions. Those are probably the ones he was acquitted for. But again, you would think that would have been allowable. I think of going back through the evidence. There was this agent, Mr. Bowers. His name is Brendan Bowers, who they asked for testimony involved in the raids of Mikrin's office here in Maryland. Task force took you there to that location, to the 10X location in Maryland, in Fulton, Maryland. And then also the Transport Logistics Office was also raided. Again, that same office that Task Force was able to get into, not into the actual office, but we showed you the front door of those two places where the raids were. And this Agent Bowers was involved in both of those raids. One was a surreptitious raid of the Russian offices where they actually had a safe cracker go in. There was papers, there was a laptop, key papers that contained this remuneration scheme, so they found that, they found a cell phone and so forth in the safe. So there is some espionage here. That was a February of 2014 raid, and then there was also a raid in late 2014 at the TLI offices, same building the task force took you to. So we were definitely in the right places where the FBI had been. We definitely had this correct Agent Bowers. Task Force had done a lot of research on Bowers, I believe, with him being a part of the Defense Threat Reduction Agency in the Army. He did logistics, the 101st Airborne logistics, before he became a special agent. So Task Force had done a lot of research on the people who were actually involved in these raids. And she felt that was a lot of the metadata that would link up, and it was just very interesting to see that come up today, as the jury wanted a new transcript of what his testimony was. Normally they don't give out, apparently, transcript information until the trial is over with. So, but that was another plant by Sullivan saying, hey, why was I shunted away from the discovery of those materials? You also didn't let me have my own client's 302 interviews for my own client and helping him recall what he said. So if I don't know exactly what happened, I can understand if it's a co-conspirator, but I still think some of that 302 information should have been given over, because the defense couldn't construct what the actual total scheme was with Condrey. Now remember, Condrey had already admitted to being in this scheme with the Russian, in the bribery scheme. So it seems like knowledge of how the scheme worked from 2002 all the way to 2014 would be important for them to say, hey, these guys were doing this for a dozen years, okay? They were Condrey was trying to get off the hook and not go to jail, right? He had been running this thing, and only in 2015 did this monkey, if you will, get thrown over to Mark Lambert, did this conversation. They brought in a whistleblower, supposedly this William Campbell. They brought in this K Street lobbyist to entrap Mark Lambert with this kind of entrapment situation, entrapment scenario, lure scenario, and they didn't use the tape for that. So you feel, that if Bijan Kian, if you people remember the Mike Flynn Bijan Kian trial where it got overturned, where the guilty plea got overturned, I think this case may be the same thing. A lot of the people looking at this trial are saying, hey, these are the big guys collecting all the information, making sure use all the public resources to go out and get all the possible information, and then seal it, basically. And they're punishing the little guys, or using the little guys as really discovery vehicles, if you will. And then they're just burying all this information. If you remember, I asked Mark Lambert briefly as I walked by him where he was. Navy usually doesn't train you to speak in Muslim countries if you're not going to at least be sending things to Muslim countries, or Farsi-speaking countries specifically. I asked him if he had lived in Iran, and of course, Deep Uranium had told me that no, it was Kazakhstan. So he didn't say Mark Lambert specifically because he didn't know who it was at that time, but he was saying that Kazakhstan, being the richest country with uranium in the world, that was the center of the weapons program and the atomic testing program of the old Soviet Union. That's where they would have exfiltrated. If you were going to do a joint venture, that's where you would have done the conversion of the uranium. You would have flown it over the mountains there in Pakistan in order for Pakistan to get the bomb, in order for Pakistan to then be a proliferator after they get the bomb. Same thing would be true of potentially of India before that with South Africans. So there was a lot of things that I had heard before task force had honed in on the Iranian idea. I'm still not sure she wasn't right, but I'm leaning more over toward Deep Uranium's information saying no, it was actually the containers, these casks in Kazakhstan. There was no roads, there was no railways at that time. They would have had to get 101st Airborne or somebody like that, airlift capability, C-5 big airlift capability to get those to Pakistan, and then have Pakistan AQ Khan move all the yellow cake, and not the yellow cake, but it would be converted to UF6 gas, and then that would be the backbone of all these new rogue nuclear plants. So this is kind of still a little bit of a nuclear chessboard. We don't know. Mark Lambert seems to not be on the technology side as far as shipping centrifuges and things like that. That seems to be this DTRA. And it's just interesting that the agent that raids these two offices, raids the Russians' office first and then raids Mark Lambert's office, just happens to be one of those DTRA guys from the 101st Airborne. Not casting aspersions here, but I'm just saying that the defense was shielded and boxed from understanding the true nature of what was going on between the U.S. State Department and the Russians. I think there's something going on here at the Rodney Fisk level with the disposition of all these nuclear warheads that the defense never understood and couldn't. They were blinded in a way, boxed in a way. I don't know if that was Bob Mueller saying, hey, don't talk about my trip to Tbilisi, with the highly enriched uranium. Could have been national secrets. We don't know the whole background there, but that's the frustration, I guess, in these cases. In the Kian case, we had a very corner case, a very small, a very small portion of the case, which was about, I'm going to move over here if the wind is bad, a very small portion of the case, which was, talking about writing doing an op-ed about Gulen, which doesn't really make any sense, and then him getting convicted for a FARA violation, when you've got everything going on with Azerbaijan and buying discounted oil from Iran and illegally shipping it to be refined in Turkey. I mean, you got everything going on. USAID going to Kazakhstan for the railroads. You've got USAID and IMF loans going for the pipeline to Turkey. You have a lot of things going on in that case for them to be so worried about a video about Gulen, about a cleric. At the same time, if you remember that case, there was a company called Amsterdam Partners that put out a huge video, the same thing. So why weren't they, about Turkey and about Gulen, and why weren't they brought into a FARA court with Mike Flynn? The good news in that case was the judge overturned the Bijan Kian guilty plea. The same thing may happen here. I just get the idea that this is being run at a very high level, a Bob Mueller type of level. We don't want you to know what's going on in Georgia. We don't want you to know why I flew to Georgia with the vial of HEU. We don't want you to know that Frederick, Maryland is the activity center for infectious diseases. That's also where chemical weapons are developed. We don't want you to know that Battelle does all these chemical weapons in Columbus. We don't want you to know they do the chemical weapons in Frederick, Maryland. You know, we don't want you to know about the paperclip beginnings of any of these places. We just want you to know that the last guy in the chain here as a CEO was busted for 7 money transfers. And I spoke to a couple of different court reporters today, and you know, in a lot of places they were already giving 20% kickers to Japanese trading companies for the trade in Japan. So the idea of a middleman making some money, a broker making 20%, there's no problem. But because we're paying a Russian general's son 7% and transferring him some money, that's bribery. It just doesn't square with the facts that they were already doing the same thing with the Japanese trading companies. I think that's another thing Sullivan brought out. He said, hey, this really isn't any kind of different practice than you had with the Japanese trading company. And remember, over the full flight of this 35 years that all these people have been together, no one had ever said this is a bribery scheme. At no point did anybody sit down with Mark Lambert and say, this is a bribery scheme. I hope you know that. I hope we're giving the kickback to the Russian general who had all the weapons, right? So if we give his kids some money, he'll give us the nukes, right? No one ever sat down with Mark Lambert. Now, it may very well be that, like Fiona Hill says, like Bill Taylor says, Ukraine's a frontline country. It's the place which is a bulwark against the, Russian menace and all the little green men, and we need to have, javelins up at the front. Well, the same thing can be said for Georgia, Tbilisi. We need to have chemical weapons there. The U.S. Army obviously has a very large chemical weapons plant there, and we need to have nukes there. We need to have neutron bombs to stop the Russian tanks threat. And maybe that's why the HEU is going for covert programs for all these nations on the border, on the doorstep of Russia. We don't know the answer to why Bob Mueller is going to Tbilisi with the HEU, but this very much feels like the big guy getting away and the little guy holding the bag. It's the classic. They do the robbery, and the Lyft driver that they call to take him to the getaway house to divide up the loot is somehow, hears the word robbery, and just because he heard the word robbery, he had some inclination that there was a scheme. He saw a bag, it would be like putting me away for Uranium One. Well, you went to Imran Awan's house, you did actually, talk to somebody who knew about the Blackberries, the congressional Blackberries, the secure Blackberries, the Crowdstrike Blackberries. You knew that those were the drives, didn't you? Kind of, but I was trying to actually report on it. Mark Lambert, another thing that Sullivan did, planted a good seed of doubt, was, hey, you didn't, he called in, I think Winthrop Strawn, law firm and interviewed after the first CEO was indicted. Connery was indicted in 2015, April 2015. He calls in a law firm, and they go through and do depositions. They do depositions for about 30 people that work there. They collect some laptops. They collect some phones. I just don't think a CEO does that kind of due diligence, unless the whole thing's just a front for chemical weapons shipping from Frederick, Maryland to Georgia, and that's the end of the story. It's just a way of these guys diverting these nuclear matchsticks maybe to whatever. That's speculation, but there's something else going on here. It very much seems like a vacuum, a slap and seal. Very much seems like they're vacuuming up the information to seal this thing. I'm going to start working today to work for the reversal of this verdict by Judge Chuang. Maybe that was the plan all along, but I'm going to start working for the reversal today. I sat not 10 feet, well, maybe 20 feet away from the gal, Mark Lambert's wife, the Krupnik gal, the gal I interviewed. Maybe they lived in Kazakhstan. Of course, Roman Krupnik was from Kazakhstan. He had the Krupnik crushers. The other Krupnik had mines and gold mines in Kazakhstan, along with uranium mines. They had a son that was in, I believe, Zambia or Namibia. I can't remember which one. I think it was Zambia. So they've lived, by the mines for their whole life. Mark Lambert's the expert, the weight and balance sort of expert for putting stuff on a plane or putting stuff on a ship, because there's a whole risk of getting things too close to each other. They can combust and so forth. So it's the weight and balance guy. It's sort of like, the hijackers put a gun to the weight and balance guy's head and said, we're going to leave here. We're going to fly this HEU UF-6. We're going to fly it out of this old weapons cache in Kazakhstan. We're going to bribe the weapons cache guard, and we're going to fly it over to, Faisalabad or wherever I'm trying to think of the place in Pakistan, and we're going to get their nuclear program going because they're a frontline country to Russia. This is in our best interest. This is the State Department. This is Fiona Hill. This is a bulwark against the Russian menace. It just has that feel. I don't know. That's my initial thing. Okay, empty military base in Blue Ridge Summit. Blue Ridge Summit. I've been up there in Virginia. I think Blue Ridge Summit's in Virginia. You get the idea. A lot of these military bases are being taken over, and a lot of them have this kind of backup power. And you feel like you just feel that black hand on this trial. I don't know how. I can't remember the Puerto Rican guy's name. And Felix, what's his name, and Frank Wisner and so forth. So stuff for you to look at. I'll probably chop some of this stuff off at the end, a little bit long here today, but the bottom line is Mark Lambert guilty on 7 counts, innocent on